Good evening, I'm Alex Truth.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Welcome to Truth Report.
Tonight, we're diving deep into a story that reveals something profound about the global AI economy, and it's happening in a country most Americans couldn't find on a map without their phones.
We're talking about South Korea, which just became Google's second largest AI market overnight. Not third. Not fifth. Second. Behind only the United States. And the way they got there tells us everything about who's winning and who's losing in the AI gold rush.
Because here's the thing, this isn't just about one tech company doing well in one country. This is about the architecture of digital colonialism in the 21st century, and South Korea just became Exhibit A.
Let's start with the numbers, because they're absolutely stunning. According to digital analytics firm Sensor Tower, reporting on January 26, 2026, South Korea now generates approximately $21 million in cumulative revenue for Google's Gemini AI service on Apple's App Store alone. That's 11.4% of Gemini's total global revenue from a country with 51 million people.
The United States, with 340 million people and every possible advantage, generates 23.7%. Do the math. South Korea's revenue per capita is roughly 6 times higher than America's. 6 times. For a subscription AI service that most Americans have barely heard of.
And here's where it gets really interesting. South Korea ranks only 17th in total downloads of Gemini. 17th. But they have the highest revenue per download of any major market on Earth. What does that tell you?
It tells me that South Koreans aren't just downloading this app out of curiosity and abandoning it. They're paying. They're subscribing. They're going premium. According to reporting from the Korea Times, we're talking about Gemini Advanced subscriptions, bundled with Google One AI Premium, running about $18 to $20 per month. And South Koreans are converting at rates that make Silicon Valley executives salivate.
Let's talk about what triggered this explosion, because timing matters. Google launched Gemini 3 in November 2024, that's just over a year ago. The upgraded version featured enhanced reasoning capabilities, multimodal understanding, improved research and writing tools. Standard AI industry hype, right?
Except in South Korea, it wasn't hype. Daily active users surged 103.7% after the Gemini 3 launch. That's more than doubling. And that growth rate was the highest among all major markets worldwide. Not just high, the highest.
Now, OpenAI's ChatGPT still has the largest total user base in South Korea. That's important context. But look at what's happening to the competitive landscape. Before Gemini 3 launched, about 23.2% of ChatGPT users in South Korea also used Gemini. After the launch? That number jumped to 40.8%.
And the gap in daily active users between ChatGPT and Gemini shrank from 7 to 1 down to 4 to 1 in a matter of months. We're watching a market consolidation happen in real time, and Google is gaining ground fast.
So the obvious question is, why South Korea? Why is this happening there and not, say, Germany or Japan or the UK?
Well, according to multiple sources including reports from Invest Korea and Industry Analysis, South Korea already has the world's highest robot density per capita. Their digital infrastructure is second to none. They have near universal high-speed internet. But that's just the foundation.
The South Korean government doubled its AI investment budget to €700 million in 2026, according to Business of Apps reporting on AI adoption trends. That's not just grants and research, that's creating a culture where AI adoption is a national priority, where companies and citizens are expected to integrate these tools or fall behind.
And here's the part that should make every American wake up. South Korea's Ministry of Science and ICT proposed a 2026 budget of $12.3 billion to boost AI, deep tech, biotech, and startup support. That includes $1.61 billion specifically for AI adoption in manufacturing. They're not playing around.
Compare that to the United States, where we can't even pass a functional budget without shutting down the government every 6 months. South Korea is treating AI like the space race. They're treating it like an existential national competitiveness issue.
Because it is. And they understand something that Washington doesn't: the countries that control AI infrastructure will control the global economy for the next 50 years. Maybe longer.
Now let's talk about who actually benefits from this. Because when we say South Korea is winning, we need to ask, which South Koreans? Who's getting rich?
Well, Google, obviously. They're extracting $21 million and counting from South Korean consumers, and that number is only going up. Every subscription, every API call, every piece of data generated by South Korean users flows back to servers in the United States, Ireland, Singapore, wherever Google decides to store it.
And Samsung. Let's not forget Samsung. According to reports on Samsung's AI Vision announcement at CES 2026, Gemini is now integrated directly into Galaxy AI, which runs on millions of Samsung devices. Users don't even have to download an app, it's already there, pre-installed, ready to harvest data and sell subscriptions.
Samsung announced plans to double Gemini-enabled device production in 2026. That's tens of millions of phones, tablets, wearables, all feeding into Google's AI ecosystem. And Samsung gets a cut. They get to say they're on the cutting edge. They get government subsidies and tax breaks for innovation.
But what about the actual workers? What about the small business owners who can't afford $20 a month AI subscriptions for every employee? What about the Korean language AI startups that were trying to compete in their own domestic market?
They're getting crushed. When Google and Samsung form a partnership like this, backed by billions in government investment, there's no room for local competition. A Korean university student trying to build a better Korean language AI model can't compete with Gemini's multimodal capabilities, its integration across every Samsung device, its brand recognition.
And here's the deeper issue. According to research from Expert Market Research and Fortune Business Insights, the South Korean AI market is expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of 41% from 2026 to 2033. The market was valued at 3.43 trillion Korean won in 2025 and is projected to hit 4.46 trillion won by 2027.
That's explosive growth. But who captures that value? Not South Korean workers, who are already facing massive automation pressure in manufacturing. Not South Korean teachers, whose jobs are being augmented by AI tutors that cost a fraction of their salaries.
The value flows to Google, to Samsung, to the handful of companies that own the infrastructure, the models, the distribution channels. And South Korea, for all its investment, for all its adoption, becomes a revenue colony.
Let's zoom out, because this is the pattern we're seeing globally. According to the Second Talent Report on countries with the highest AI adoption rates, approximately 60% of South Korean companies plan to implement AI technologies by 2026. Consumer adoption jumped from 25.9% in the first half of 2025 to 30.7% by year-end.
South Korea recorded an 81.4% user growth rate, the highest among all surveyed countries. They climbed 7 places in global AI adoption rankings in just 6 months. This is a nation transforming itself at breakneck speed.
And they're not alone. We're seeing similar patterns in Taiwan, Singapore, parts of the EU. Developed economies with strong digital infrastructure, high education levels, and governments willing to invest billions in AI adoption.
But here's what's not happening: local ownership. Local control. When South Korea adopts Gemini at these rates, they're not building sovereign AI capabilities. They're becoming dependent on American tech infrastructure.
Think about what that means geopolitically. If tensions escalate between the US and China, and South Korea finds itself caught in the middle, which it always does, what happens when Google decides to cut off Gemini access? Or raises prices? Or changes terms of service?
South Korea would be crippled overnight. Their manufacturing, which is increasingly dependent on AI optimization. Their education system, which is integrating AI tutors. Their healthcare, their logistics, their government services, all of it runs through American-owned infrastructure.
This is digital colonialism, plain and simple. And the tragedy is that South Korea has the technical talent, the resources, the government will to build their own AI systems. But they're choosing the easier path, the path of integration with American tech giants.
And you can understand why, right? Building a competitive AI model from scratch costs tens of billions of dollars. It takes years. You need massive compute infrastructure, enormous datasets, armies of researchers. Even if South Korea started today, they'd be 5 years behind.
So they take the deal. They let Google in. They let Samsung pre-install Gemini on every device. They subsidize adoption with government programs. And they tell themselves they're winning because their adoption rates are high, because they're leaders in AI.
But leadership without ownership is just another word for clientelism. And that's exactly what we're witnessing.
Let's talk about the human cost, because these numbers, 103.7% growth, 81.4% adoption rates, they obscure what's happening to actual people. According to multiple reports on South Korea's labor market, AI is already displacing workers in manufacturing, customer service, and administrative roles.
And the government's solution is retraining programs. Learn to work with AI. Learn to manage AI systems. Become an AI-augmented worker. Which sounds great until you realize that augmented often means cheaper and more disposable.
Because if an AI can do 70% of your job, your employer doesn't need to pay you for 100% of your time. They'll hire you part-time, contract, gig basis. No benefits, no security, no dignity.
And the profits from that increased efficiency? They don't go to workers. They go to shareholders. To executives. And in this case, to Google and Samsung, who own the tools that make the automation possible.
We reached out to Google for comment on their South Korea strategy and their plans for revenue sharing with local partners. As of airtime, we haven't received a response.
We also contacted the South Korean Ministry of Science and ICT to ask about safeguards for workers displaced by AI adoption. We received a statement emphasizing their commitment to inclusive growth and human-centered AI, but no specific policies or budget allocations.
Which tells you everything. The rhetoric is always about inclusion, about human-centered technology. But the actual policies are about maximizing adoption, maximizing growth, maximizing revenue for the companies that already have power.
Let's connect this to the broader pattern, because South Korea isn't unique. We're seeing this same playbook everywhere AI is being deployed at scale.
In the United States, Microsoft and OpenAI are racing to lock in enterprise customers before anyone has a chance to question the long-term costs. In Europe, despite all the talk about AI regulation, American tech companies are still dominating the market.
And in the developing world, the situation is even more stark. Countries that can't afford to invest billions in AI infrastructure are being left behind entirely, creating a new kind of global inequality.
But South Korea shows us what happens even when you do everything right, when you invest heavily, when you have technical talent, when you achieve high adoption rates. You still end up dependent on foreign infrastructure. You still end up as a revenue source for Silicon Valley.
Unless you make a different choice. Unless you prioritize sovereignty over speed, local ownership over convenience.
And that's the conversation we're not having. In Washington, in Seoul, in Brussels, everywhere AI policy is being made, the assumption is that adoption is inherently good. Faster is better. Integration with American tech platforms is the only viable path.
But that's not a law of nature. That's a choice. And it's a choice that serves the interests of a very small number of very powerful companies.
The data tells the story. South Korea, 51 million people, $21 million in Gemini revenue and climbing fast. That's money flowing out of Korean pockets, into Google's coffers, in exchange for access to tools that could have been built domestically with the right priorities.
And the truly frustrating part is that South Korea has world-class tech companies. Samsung, LG, SK Telecom, Naver, Kakao, these are not small players. They have the resources to build competitive AI systems.
But they don't, because it's more profitable to partner with Google. Samsung gets to offload the R&D costs, the infrastructure costs, the liability. They just integrate Gemini into Galaxy AI, collect their licensing fees, and call it innovation.
Meanwhile, Google gets access to millions of users, gets training data from every interaction, gets to shape the AI ecosystem in one of the world's most advanced tech markets. It's a fantastic deal, if you're Google.
So what's the alternative? What should South Korea, or any country facing this situation, actually do?
Well, first, recognize that AI infrastructure is strategic infrastructure, like energy or telecommunications. You don't outsource your electrical grid to foreign companies and hope for the best. You build domestic capacity, even if it's more expensive in the short term.
Second, mandate transparency and data sovereignty. If Google wants to operate Gemini in South Korea, fine, but the data generated by South Korean users should be stored on South Korean servers, subject to South Korean law, and accessible to South Korean researchers.
Third, invest in open-source AI development. Not every country needs to build a competitor to Gemini from scratch, but the global community could pool resources to create open-source alternatives that aren't controlled by any single company or country.
Fourth, implement profit-sharing mechanisms. If AI is going to automate jobs and increase productivity, workers and citizens should see some of that benefit. That could mean taxes on AI-driven productivity gains, universal basic income, public ownership stakes in AI companies.
But none of that is happening. Instead, we get the South Korea model, rapid adoption, massive investment, total dependence on foreign infrastructure, and all the economic gains flowing to a handful of corporations.
And the window to change course is closing. Every day that South Korean companies integrate more deeply with Gemini, every day that workers are retrained to use Google's tools, every day that students learn to rely on Gemini for homework and research, that's another day of lock-in.
5 years from now, switching away from Gemini will be unthinkable. The costs will be too high, the disruption too severe. And Google knows this. They're not trying to win the South Korean market, they're trying to own it.
This is the story we need to be telling about AI. Not the utopian fantasy where everyone benefits equally. Not the dystopian panic about robots taking over. The actual story, concentrated corporate power using technological advancement to extract wealth and consolidate control.
And South Korea, despite being one of the most technologically sophisticated countries on Earth, despite investing billions, despite achieving record adoption rates, they're still on the losing end of this equation.
Because in the AI economy, adoption without ownership is just another form of exploitation.
The question is whether anyone with power will recognize that in time to do something about it. So far, the evidence suggests they won't.
We'll keep watching. We'll keep reporting. And we'll keep asking the questions that Silicon Valley and its government partners don't want answered.
That's our show for tonight. I'm Maya Clarity.
And I'm Alex Truth. Stay skeptical. Stay informed. And remember, when someone tells you technology is inevitable, they're usually trying to sell you something.
Good night.